have an older sister. And recently I noticed that we have a lot of similarities. I mean, we both get the same haircut, do the same makeup style, get the same nail set, and she likes to argue that I stole her style. But because I'm the youngest sister, I like to say that she just influenced me in the way that I carry myself. You see, this is the same relationship that Western films had with international films back in the 1950s and the 1970s, during the time where a lot of films were coming out at a rapid pace. And most media analysis critics like myself like to say that Western films had a lot of influence from international films during this time, during all of these different techniques and the camera works, the editing style, even the way that dialogue comes out now. And in today's video, to save you some time, I would only be talking about the top 3 most influential ones in the 1950s through the 1970s, starting off with my favorite one, Rashomon, a 1950s Japanese film that showcased the murder of a samurai, told in 4 different perspectives, from a wife, a thief, a witness, and the samurai himself through a medium. Now, what makes this film so iconic is the influence that it had on Western films now, telling a narrative in different perspectives that all contradict each other. This is called the Rashomon effect. Now, this helps the viewers determine their own conclusion, leaving them questioning what is really going on and having their own thoughts and ideas on why this movie was so influential to them as well. One good example of this was the film The Outrage, a 1964 film directed by Martin Ritt, which has same core with 4 different witnesses all contradicting each other, so no one really knows what really went on, but it does tell a good story knowing that no one is right and at the same time nobody is ever wrong. Moving on to another international film, it's a Swedish one from 1957, The Seventh Seal, directed by Ingmar Bergman. The story follows a Swedish knight that returns home from his crusades, only to find that his country is hanging on by a thread, only to be in a whole pandemic by the Black Death. Now, he delays his own death by playing chess with the death. In the end, he does lose the game of chess, but it only makes the viewer wonder, what is really the theme of this story? It does have a really bad, eerie and scary theme to it, but there's nothing really scary going on. There's no jump scares and there's no actual death killing people. You just have the idea of death there. And I need you to really hear me out with this one. So there is no specific Western film that directed the same as The Seventh Seal did, just because it's so iconic. But it did open up the ideas to influence other directors here in the Western side to play with these philosophical themes. And I have a couple examples that do the same thing. You know, just having parodies of playing chess with death and seeing how far they could go. And even whenever COVID-19 was going on, they had a lot of pandemic movies that were not scary, but definitely had the same eerie tone that Seventh Seal had. The Seventh Seal was the one that influenced all of these movies to have these same themes that play with morality and let the viewers think, what is actually scary? You know, is there actually any ideas of God out there without having to put a religious theme to it? Now, like I mentioned, some of them were doing this in a parody way, so it's not really necessarily have to be scary whenever it comes to death, or playing chess with death, or having God and having no beliefs just like the knight in the movie had. Some examples could be Love and Death from 1975, Monty Python and the Holy Grail from 1975, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey from 1991, and various other TV shows that just like to parody death and God. Okay, now moving on. You know I have to save the best for last. But before we get into that, I need to give you a little bit of history lesson. So, the French New Wave. Basically, a lot of French critics came up with the idea of having a more human-like film storytelling. Does that make sense? I mean, it came up between the 1950s and 1960s when a lot of films were coming out to give out more adventures and horror and wanted to tell a story, but what actual stories told a perspective of a human? What actual stories would feel and touch the audience in a way that others could not? So this is whenever they came out with different rules out here. So one of them starting off with a non-linear editing, or more jump cuts, short clips if you might call it. They wanted to let go of all that sequencing with all these films coming out. Another big one was handheld cameras. So all those shaky films that you saw, those were intentional. It just wanted to give you a little more perspective of realism and wanted to get you into the scene. As well as improvised dialogue, direct lighting, direct sound with little to no editing. The French critics really wanted to have a different type of technique out here that wanted to give it a raw feel to the audience. With that being said, let's talk about Breathless. It's a French 1961 film by Jean-Luc Godard. It tells an anti-hero story where a thief is shown killing a cop in the beginning of the movie and later on committing small crimes just to hide his identity even further and eventually meeting up with a woman who he falls in love with and gets her pregnant. It doesn't take much long after that she notices that he is a criminal himself and she doesn't want to be with him anymore. She becomes a little more suspicious of him and things start to get a little more intense. Eventually, his consequences reach up to him and he succumbs to his consequences whenever a cop shoots him back this time. Now, although the story is really cliche to follow, it's not the most easiest to understand at the beginning because all of these little jump cuts that happen. I mean, in one moment we're in the apartment, the next moment they're arguing, the next moment there's a shooting going on. But you just know you make the little connections here and there. That editing style does give a little bit of that French New Wave style where we get a lot of personal in-depth with these characters, especially because none of the shots there are made with a tripod. And you could just tell how the camera is so shaky. It almost looks like someone is there watching with them in the room throughout every argument and every scene. Every little action, the camera moves with them. Now, as all Western influences, you know they have to come up with their own names. So here is where the American wave comes around with the filmmaking, where they made out all these non-linear points and using different camera points with panning and zooming and shaking with all these camera things, but thus creating a lot of good films now, just like Bonnie and Clyde, The Graduate, and Badlands that are created now, which are also my top favorite ones, with anti-hero, but we do get to follow the story that is more humane and very relatable, I would say. Now, I know I threw a lot of information at you, so let's do a little recap. Starting up with the Rashomon effect, it was a really good narrative story now that influenced a lot of different techniques out there, but tells the same perspective and coming out with all these contradicting effects. At the end, it helps the viewer want to decide which conclusion they want or what theme they want to choose. The Seventh Seal came out with the psychological way that they could do horror movies without using all these jump scares and horror stuff, but also made it relatable. Playing a game with death is not the funnest thing, but it is really influential. And lastly, Breathless, the French film, my favorite, that had the most understanding yet different camera works out there to have the viewer maybe a little bit confused, but also a little bit with being more in the moment. But yeah, the 1950s throughout the 1970s, a lot of international films did do a lot of influencing with Western films at that time, and even now during current time where we get even more understanding and development with all these directors, you never know what's gonna come up. I might make another video if you like this one. Thanks again for tuning in. My name is Karen Reina and this was my school project. Thank you.